You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, Executive Director at 95 Network. And again, today I'm with one of my favorite people in the whole world, my brother who lives in South Dakota. I'm in South Carolina, so we're both South. But
I always tell people I'm from the South.
Yeah, your South is nothing like my South. I can tell you that. My friend Jon Sanders. Jon, how you doing today?
Man, I'm doing good, Dale. Great to be back with you on the podcast and just having a minute to catch up with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and our listeners know you host us. You'll host a sit-in podcast from time to time. I love the last one you did. That was really cool. I checked that one out, and from time to time. In fact, if you look at the YouTube roll-in now, you're in there.
No way.
Yeah, you are. The second scene is you and doing your hosting your podcast. So you have arrived.
I'm calling my mom as soon as we get off this podcast. She's going to be so proud. And my high school guidance counselor who said I would never amount to anything. He's got to see that too.
Yeah,
so.
well, I'll make sure I'll send you a link. Well, anyway, today I want to catch up on a couple of things. One, I want to find out just what's happening with Entrepastors, and we'll dive into that a little bit. But before we do that, the last time that you and I really got together was I had you on the podcast as a guest because you had just gone to a retreat. And it really impacted your life. That's been a few months. Did it fade or did it take root? It kind of where we are. It kind of for those who did not hear it, kind of set it up before you talk about it.
Yeah, you definitely should go back and listen to that episode if you and maybe you can link to it in the show notes or something.
Yes, I will.
But if you haven't heard that conversation, but I'll try to make it as brief as I can. I went to a week-long retreat for first responders, kind of dealing with the whole mental health and mental wellness thing. I'm a full-time firefighter in addition to some other things that I do. And man, it was an impactful week. And the real epiphany came when I got home from that, just in a conversation with my wife. We were talking about church-related things. Mm-hmm. And the question came up that she asked me. She said, have you forgiven the people of the church that we had planted and led for 17 years? And I thought about that for a minute. I was like, there's no bitterness in my heart toward the people. I said, no, I don't have unforgiveness. I said, you know what it is? And then here's kind of the light bulb moment. I said, I feel rejection. And I said, ultimately, I feel a sense of shame, like just a little bit lower than that level of rejection is a sense of shame. And then that just started to connect the dots to some stuff going clear back to childhood, having nothing to do with pastoring or ministry or preaching or any of that. Yeah. And kind of has me on a journey. And Dale, you know how they say to get to your question about, was that just a fade, a phase that faded away? That's hard to say. Mm-hmm. Or did it take root? You know how they say, like in a remodeling project, that things have to get worse before they get better. That's where I'm at right now. My wife and I just stumbled onto that metaphor the other day that, well, we're definitely in the worst part, just unpacking some stuff. So I've been on a journey here the last few months, really the better part of this year, just kind of exploring with some help of some counselors and other resources that I've invested into to kind of see what that's all about. And I don't say any of that from a standpoint of being a victim or anything, just wanting growth, wanting to be healthy and be ready for the next season, the next phase of life, and not become a casualty of some of these things through a lack of awareness,
Oh, you've started my curiosity now, man. So without revealing, don't reveal anything you don't want to reveal, but kind of, if it's gotten worse before it's gotten better, what do you mean by that?
Well, yeah, it's a fair question. It's really probably going back to some unhealed things in our marriage is probably one of the biggest areas that I'm recognizing how much some of this posture in my life has been. I could get into some of the psychobabble of it all and talk about some of the attachment styles that I've been learning about and things like that. But I mean, bottom line, if you grow up and have kind of a father wound where there's this is Bob Hamp helped me see this, Dale, you hooked me up with Bob Hamp, and I know he's been a guest on the show. But man, and I don't say any of this with bitterness or as a as a victim. But, Bob basically said, Jon, your father was unable to be intimate with you and give you that intimacy, and therefore you have struggled to do that as well. And then I learned about this term called dismissive avoidant. And again, it gets to this whole theory and study of attachment styles. And, all of these things are just tools. I don't put all my weight on any of these things, but they are interesting things to study to recognize, okay, so there's a long standing pattern of behavior in my life that stems from just some unawareness of how I show up in a relationship, especially, with that, in my marriage with my wife. So it's really just looking back over 27 years of marriage going, oh my goodness, man, if I could go back and change some things early on, if I could address some of these things early on and avoid some of the pain that I've caused because of this, and how I've responded to some of these natural, tendencies, we'd be in a different place. So that when I say it has to get worse before it gets better, like that's a painful thing to go through some of those conversations and to peel back some of those layers. And, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything's just gumdrops and lollipops. When you do that deep work, there's a reason a lot of us don't like to do that deep work, right? Because it's a lot easier just to put my head down and focus on today and what's in front of me and not really look back to the past. So, I'm grateful for where I am. I'm grateful for the revelations that God has given to me in some of these areas, and just asking for his, healing and faithfulness as he walks me through it. And that's the cool thing in all of it, Dale. We serve an amazing God who is a God of grace and forgiveness and mercy, and his mercies are new every morning. That verse takes on a whole new meaning in a season where your eyes are being opened to just how many mistakes you've made and missteps. It's like, man, God, thank you for that mercy, because I need it. I'm absolutely standing in need of it. So
I always did not want to become the guy who says, man, if I had just known then what I know now. And I used to say, I'm never going to say that. And that's all I say. Because, it started for me, though, when I wrote Stalled. When I wrote Stalled, that was very cathartic in writing that. And see, the book's 45,000 words, but I wrote 90,000. I just poured it all out, and then we culled down to what needed to be in the book. But see, when I wrote the book, I thought, all right, now I'm good. I didn't realize that wasn't the ending. It was the beginning.
You were just starting the remodeling process.
And then, almost drowning a couple of years later. And I ended up to talk about Bob, I ended up in Texas for a week on his couch because the near drowning experience, which was the third time I'd confronted death in the last basically 10 years, it rocked my world to the point that I couldn't put it back together again. And I guess, Jon, knowing me, and we're wired so much alike, but knowing me, I had to have a near-death experience to finally get to the point to where I was willing to go, I need to get help, because I didn't know I needed help. It's like when I had my heart surgery 10 years ago. I had a widowmaker. Well, the problem with a widowmaker is you don't know you have it. Yeah. And usually the number one sign that you had a widowmaker was sudden death. Well, thank God that we found it before that. But we lived this life this way, and then all of a sudden it's almost over. And we, as I learned from Bob, we've accumulated all this trauma at the base of our brain that never goes away. And I am so thankful now that I've been able to walk the journey I've walked, because some things have been unveiled to me about just, again, father wounds and that kind of thing. And my dad's a great dad. I mean, I love my dad, but there were some deficiencies in our relationship that was passed on to him.
Sure.
That really affected me more than I realized. And so I appreciate that. And I appreciate your transparency. And, this whole thing started because you made it was like a one-line post on Facebook. And I know you're good enough to go, what in the world happened to Jon? So that's when I called you and said, man, we need to do a podcast, because I don't know what happened, but I can tell by that one post you made, something rocked your world.
Yeah. And also I'll share one other angle on this. You mentioned trauma. In addition to just the childhood stuff and whatnot, I'm, my years in first responder world as a firefighter, yes. I've been in that since 1997. And I learned that week in California when I was with that group of guys, they basically taught us that, like, the military and kind of police, fire, like, they have found a way to take men and women that have some of that childhood stuff and put a razor sharp edge on that and bring the best out in those individuals. And what that looks like, to be clear, is to take that ability to disconnect emotionally and compartmentalize and go, man, I'm just not going to deal with that. And it's not like you're even consciously doing it, but you find a way. Like, there's a whole industry built upon the backs of men and women who, that's a skill set that is required in that industry to go out and do some of these amazing things, these horrible things, to see terrible things, and then come right back and have supper that they left on the table, to go see that call or do that thing. And again, all of us being type A, type people, for the most part, we all go, oh, that doesn't affect me. That's not going to bother me. I can handle this. And you start doing it, and it becomes this accumulative weight that after a while, and that's another kind of chapter of my life or another angle of this story, all of a sudden, things that you haven't thought about for years and didn't think bothered you that much, lo and behold, it actually does bother you. You've just stuffed it away back there. You've stuffed it way away, thinking, I can just kind of detach from the emotional connection. And so there again, I've told my wife a lot in these recent months, like, oh man, if that's true, like, I have a lot of pain to work through. Like, there is a lot of pain that I have seen and dealt with. And it's like, I kind of like that gift of just being able to disconnect and not feel it, Yeah. So that's a little scary. That's like, man, there's a lot of stuff there that I don't really want to feel, from that world, from the ministry world. So I don't claim to have all the answers by any means, but I know this, like, it's a lot more life-giving to walk in authentic transparency and strive for health, and not live that life where you're truly stuffing things away or suffering in silence, thinking you're the only one. The truth is, all of us have stuff in our life. You don't have to be a first responder or a pastor. All of us have things in our life. And you mentioned your relationship with your dad, Dale. Like, I think I want our listeners to hear this. I think the healthy place to get to is to be able to look back to those relationships in early childhood from a posture of grace that says, my family, my dad, my mom, my whoever, they were doing the best they knew how to do with the tools they had at their disposal. Doesn't absolve them of all responsibility. It doesn't say what happened or didn't happen to you was okay. It just kind of helps you process. Again, my goal in all of this is not to have a label of a disorder and a victim mentality, someone to blame. It's more just having an understanding of, like, how did I get here, and how do I get to a healthier place?
Well, the problem with unforgiveness too, like, if you have a father issue, mother issue, something happened, if you don't forgive the people from way back when, they move on. You're the one who gets pinned down at that point, and you can spend your whole life. I always compared it to being like the game we used to play when we were kids in elementary school, the tetherball, where the ball's on the rope and you spin. It just winds you tight. And one of the things if there's anything that I wish I could give our listeners, would be freedom. Jesus said it's for free, or the Bible says Jesus, well, this is what he was all about, it was for freedom. He set us free. And then it says, don't be entangled again in a yoke of bondage. Well, you can't, and this is to go with piggyback what we were saying, you can't walk in freedom by ignoring the issues.
That's right.
No, God is gracious to us. He lets us sometimes, he permanently blocks things that may have happened, and we don't pull them up because we can't remember them. But he also, I think if Jesus were hanging out with us, if you and me were pheasant hunting with Jesus and we're having these conversations, I think he would make us deal with it.
Yeah,
he wants us to be free. He wants us to walk in freedom.
He would take us to those places that we may not want to go, and he would take us there with a spirit of grace and healing, and not one of shame and condemnation, but just he wants us to be free. I couldn't agree more. And if Jesus was pheasant hunting with us, I bet he'd not miss once, Dale.
You know what? In fact, I think he would whistle and the birds would come running. That's for another day. We'll have to talk to him about that. So anyway, I just wanted to do the follow up to that, because I wanted to see how you were in the journey, and I'm really thankful you connected with Bob. But I want to transition to the other reason I wanted you on today. I want to kind of catch up with Entrepastors. First of all, you need to let the listeners know what that's all about for those who may not know. But then I just want to find out what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, how's it going. So kind of give us a little backdrop of what is Entrepastors.
Yeah, so Entrepastors is a platform that myself and my friend Les Hughes started a few years back. It's really an outpouring of our own journeys. He as a pastor has been in and around it his whole life, just like me. He grew up a pastor's son, just like I did. And so we've been in the world of the church and pastoral leadership basically our entire life. And it's Entrepastors is a platform where we help other pastors break out of pastoral poverty. And we didn't initially have that word for it, Dale, but I've come to kind of find that language around poverty, because that's what it is. So many pastors are living in financial poverty, which probably leads to some other types of poverty we could talk about, but we help them get out of that financial poverty through entrepreneurship, rather than trying to be more dependent upon their church and get, maybe more money out of the offerings, for their own salaries. Not that that isn't a conversation that probably needs to happen in some churches, but we recognize the average church is either unable or also unwilling at times to pay their pastors a livable wage. And so our answer is, instead of saying, hey, how do we get even more dependent upon the church and get more money out of the budget? Hey, pastor, let's help you get out in the marketplace and launch a business of your own where you can thrive financially. And we think that's going to be a really healthy thing, not only for you and your family, but also for the church that you're leading. And so that's kind of what Entrepastors is. We help pastors launch businesses, and we're coming up on year 3. This fall will be our 3rd year anniversary of doing this. So it's been really cool to see the progress that not only that we've made as a platform, but the help that we've been able to bring into the lives of some pastors. So it's going well.
Well, pastors have got to figure it out. And if your first thought was, well, I don't want to hear that, I'm just going to believe God, there's a couple things I want you to think about. One is that the average pastor age in America is above 60 now. So that's not good. And the other thing is that the baby boomers the youngest baby boomer, as we record this podcast, is about 60 years old. And so your baby boomers have been your givers, your attenders, your servers. I mean, they've been the ones who kind of anchored and kept stable the church up until this point. Well, they are retiring and dying and passing on to heaven. And if your mentality is, well, we just got to get the people to give more, you're going to be in big trouble in 10 years. It's just that we can see what's coming. We can see what is actually, but specifically what is coming. And so if you're an older pastor and your first thought is, well, these guys are nuts, I just need to sacrifice more. Or maybe you, even as a pastor, you have a poverty mentality and you think that it's somehow spiritual to be broke. Well, nothing can be further from the truth. And so I'm very thankful for you and Les and what you're doing. I know you've been able to help a lot of folks, and I want to hear some of those stories. Before we do that, let's take a quick break, and then when we finish the break, I want to come back and just kind of talk through what you're seeing right now as we do Entrepastors. So take a short break. Be right back. Back here with Jon Sanders, and we're talking through life. Specifically what we're learning about life ourselves, but also the ministry that he and Les do together called Entrepastors. So as you have now you're moving close to the 3rd year of this. Give me some good wins, some stories of pastors you've connected with that it's been real helpful for them.
I'll just give you one anecdotal story, literally from this week at the time you and I are recording this, just yesterday, Dale. One of the pastors that is in our business builders group just put a picture of 2 checks on inside of our group. He didn't put the personal information. He just put the amounts of these checks, totaling well over $12,000 for these 2 checks. Where did those checks come from? It wasn't the offering plate. Nope. It was from a little handyman business that we helped him start. And in 2 days of working through that handyman business, he made more income than he was going to make in like 3 or more months of pastoring. And we've watched him and celebrated along the way, as he's a couple times come to us and said, I just made more money in one day through this business than I make in an entire week as a pastor. And it's not just about the money. Like, we celebrate that. Yes. Let me be clear. Yes. I'm not downplaying that. I want this pastor to thrive financially and be able to, for the first time in his life, be able to take his family on a nice vacation and not worry about how they're going to pay for it and all of that. So I'm not downplaying the money part, but I want to say this about his church. When he came to us, like so many of the pastors, when they come to us, man, you can see it in their countenance. They're beat up, they're discouraged, they've been kicked in the teeth in ministry, their shoulders are slumped, they're soft-spoken. And we kind of get to watch them get the fire in their belly back. And I love that. And here's what is often the case, and as it is in this guy's story. Guess what's happening in his church? his church is starting to thrive. His church is starting to grow. Is that directly connected to the fact that he has a handyman business? Probably not. But it's also probably not completely disconnected either. It's almost like as this pastor is getting healthier and
There you
focusing
go.
on providing for his family and trusting Jesus to provide for his bride, the church, it's kind of like Jesus is going, I'll handle the church side of it. You take care of your family. I think that's in scripture that you're supposed to care for your family first. And so it's crazy to see how the church thrives when the pastor is also healthy and thriving. And that's just one story. I mean, we've helped many pastors get businesses launched, and it's just cool to see the journey. There's a lot of mindset stuff we have to work with our guys as they come to us. I'll say this, Dale, many pastors have been so taught by the system, if you will,
Yeah.
to devalue their time, to
worth.
devalue their efforts and their results because it has been so taken for granted. It's been so unappreciated. It's been so undervalued and underpaid that now when we turn them out into the marketplace as business owners and entrepreneurs, we have to help them understand you have value and you're solving problems for people and you deserve to be paid well for the work that you're doing. You're providing value. And so, yeah, as we help them kind of overcome those limiting beliefs around money, it's really cool to see them start to get comfortable actually making a decent living.
You make me think of this story. I think I've shared this a couple of times on the podcast, but for those who haven't heard it, when I was pastoring our small church, would they pay me a whopping $22,000 a year, and I
Oh, my
had three
goodness.
kids, and then again,
What'd you do with all that money, Dale? How'd you spend it all?
This is way back in the '90s, so that was it didn't go much further then. But we're the church is growing, and so as we grew, we actually added a couple of board members, and one of our board members we added was a gentleman who had become successful in business. He started at the bottom of this particular company, basically as a janitor, and had worked his way all the way up to like a vice president. Great guy, big giver, loved Jesus, good friend of mine, was very supportive of us. And so as the church grew, I added a couple of board members, and this guy added this guy on our board. And so he comes to the first board meeting. We would meet once a month on Saturday mornings, have a biscuit, and have a short board meeting for an hour, and we were done. And the first thing we would do was go over the financials. Now, this is this guy's first board meeting. The other board members have been with me for like 5 years, and we've added this guy. And so we go over the financials, and he immediately he looks at the financials and he goes, I have a question. He says, is this what we're paying you? I went, oh Lord, he's mad because they pay me too much.
Yeah.
I go, yeah. He goes, he took the sheet of paper and he flipped it across the desk and goes, well, frankly, I'm embarrassed to be a member of this church. He
Wow.
said, if you were doing what you're doing in the secular arena, you'd be making double what we're paying you.
Yeah.
And and he just went off. I mean, and I'm like, I'm embarrassed because first of all, it looks like I brought him in to do that, which I did not. But, it's like he's not a hired gun. I had no expectation he was going to do that. And then he does something that totally embarrassed me. He goes, I want to propose right now we give you a $10,000 raise. And everything got real quiet. It got real quiet. and I'm like, I mean, I don't know what to say. And John, I will never forget this as long as I live. That's when one of the other board members, who was actually their family was the one that brought me to the church, made this statement. Well, if we pay him that much, he'll be making more than I do.
We wouldn't want that.
And the new guy goes, and so what's that got to do with anything? And so they gave me the raise. And then oddly enough, the church even flourished more because I was not so stressed and having to work 2 jobs and that kind of thing. But I'll never forget when that one guy goes, well, yeah, but if we, and again, we're talking $35,000 a year. Okay. So,
right.
But when that guy made that statement, well, he'll be making more than I do. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah. Again, to me, the mindset behind that, Dale, is the fact that most Christians who love the Lord and love their church or whatever, but they don't have a mental framework in their mind for a pastor who's thriving financially. On the flip side, they absolutely are very comfortable with the idea of a pastor who's broke and struggling financially. That fits our paradigm. I am well attuned to the idea of a pastor who can't drive a decent vehicle, who can't go on vacation, who is constantly in need of something, like that. Yeah, you signed up
John,
for that. You are in ministry.
We've been married 42 years this week. We celebrated our anniversary yesterday as we record this podcast. In the 42 years we've been married, we've had health insurance maybe 12.
Yeah, I believe you.
Because couldn't afford it. and the
I
churches
believe you.
and the ministries I worked for couldn't afford it. So we didn't have it.
I've had those seasons as well. And that, I think pastors a lot of times get really bad financial advice when we surrender to God's calling in our life to go into ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with the bad advice we get is that it sounds so stinking spiritual. It's just have faith, just, let God provide. And again, who can sit and argue with that?
Jesus didn't have a place to lay his head.
Yeah, we get all of that, but the bottom line is God did give me a brain and a calculator and a sound mind and a physical body that's capable of doing some things. So listen, we can talk about the money part of it. I'll go a different angle on this as well.
Okay.
I recognize that for many years in the past, the traditional model has been full-time pastoral, position, vocational ministry. That's kind of the industry standard, man. If we can get our pastor up to where we pay them full-time and this is all they do, I'm not saying that's immoral or that we've done something wrong. I think there's some really unhealthy fruit that model has produced. But setting all that aside and looking into the future, Dale, earlier you were referencing kind of the baby boomer generation and the decline that we're seeing in the institutional church and the giving and all of that. I'm just telling you, the future of the church is going to look very different than the past. And we're not proposing some kind of new crazy idea. I might contend that we're actually returning to something very old, which is, where did we ever get the picture in the New Testament that all of these gifts of leadership in the church were supposed to be wrapped up into one really overworked and underpaid person that we call the pastor?
Yep.
I think we're going to see the church, the ones that are thriving are going to be sharing that responsibility of church leadership among a plurality of elders. And I just think the majority of them are going to be out in the marketplace where it turns out the lost world who doesn't know Christ is every day, instead of holed up inside of the safety of a church building, isolated from that world. And I just think it's going to look different. And to me, that sounds exciting. To those that their paycheck and their lifestyle depends upon the old traditional model, I recognize that can sound really scary. But you talked about kind of our aging pastor population. That's the majority of our profile of pastors who are reaching out to us. It's not the 20-somethings. Nope. It's the 40, 50, 60-somethings who are reaching out to us, recognizing, oh man, that financial advice I was given years ago in seminary and at the beginning of my pastoral ministry, I can see how that financial advice has not set us up to be able to retire or do anything that's going to provide into the future for us.
So many of the pastors that are my age, I'm 62, are not ready to retire. So many of them exempted out of Social Security and haven't worked anywhere else. So if you worked in another job, you still had to pay. So you can still be vested by working in another job if you did that. But if you've been a pastor all your life, and you exempt out of Social Security, and you don't own a home, man, I am seeing so many sad stories of they have nothing. We literally touched on this about a year ago on a podcast about this whole thing about pastors' retirement, and I had a pastor reach literally the podcast usually drops on a Tuesday morning. He sent me an email at 10 a.m. on Tuesday and go, "That's exactly me." He said, I exempted out. He says, I'm 68 years old and I have nothing.
Can I tell a quick story, Dale?
Go for it.
I want to tell a story about a guy that we interviewed twice on our podcast. His name is Greg Reed. He is a pastor who pastored one church for 43 years. I mean, you think about the faithfulness, the longevity of pastoring one church, 43 years. In
Did it have any members?
No, that's why he made it so long. He'd never had to deal with any people. So it was awesome. He said it was the best church he ever led. No, of course it had people, and he had all the pastoral issues and all the stuff. As he's aging, getting closer to his retirement, he's recognizing we can't afford to live on the non-savings that we have. Yeah. So what am I going to do? Well, for about the last 15 years of his pastoral ministry, he had been working on his days off on Friday as a chaplain in the workplace for a large national chaplain company, probably making $12-15 an hour or whatever. What he realized was I could do this same type of work, but I could do it as my own business instead of, doing it as an employee, and went through the proper channels. And essentially he rebranded himself as a workplace life coach. He didn't call himself a chaplain, which I love and applaud. He didn't come in with kind of this religious overtone. He said, I'm a workplace life coach. He has 5 clients that pay him $25,000 a piece a year for a contract. He's in 5 different businesses for 1 day a week. And he comes into these corporations and he is just present. He's shepherding people in the marketplace. And when you talk, he is like the youngest 73-year-old you'll ever meet. When you talk to him, he is just on fire, full of life. And he's like, I can't believe I get paid to do what I get to do. He said, I get to do all the stuff I loved about pastoring. I don't have to do any of the stuff I didn't love about pastoring. And he's always got some kind of Jesus conversation where he has been able to pray with someone, share the gospel with someone, encourage someone. And the stories of ministry that are happening through his, entrepreneurial endeavor in the workforce, it's just inspiring. And I'm like, man, that's something we could help a whole bunch of other pastors do. And incidentally, we are. Greg, we're working with him to actually be able to train other pastors how to do that very thing. But I want our listeners to hear this, even if you're in that stage going, man, I got nothing. I've been in church life my whole life. I want you to know all of those pastoral skills that you've been honing as a pastor are transferable to the marketplace. They're highly valued in the marketplace and will be rewarded far better financially than they ever were inside the church structure. And if we can get you, instead of being resistant or thinking like it's some kind of a penalty box or a stigma of failure.
Let's go even further. It's almost like it's sin. It's almost like, I've worked in the secular arena. That's sinful. No.
Yeah. No. Well, you know what that does, Dale? Can I tee off on that for just a minute?
Go for it, buddy. Go for it.
Me. I hate that word secular. I know what we mean when we say it, but think about what we're implying, Pastor, when we get up and talk about, well, I have this sacred calling. You all just have this secular thing you do Monday through Saturday out in the marketplace. You are literally saying to your congregation, whether you are intending to imply this or not, you are implying those of us who work for the Lord in the church are just a little more called than the rest of you. You all go do secular work. I do sacred work. I'm just a little bit more called. And then you scratch your head and wonder why everyone sits back and expects you to be Superman and do all the stuff because you're the one that's doing the sacred work. There is not a single square inch in this entire universe where Jesus Christ has not planted his flag and declared himself as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And that includes the marketplace. So when you're stepping into that, Pastor, it is ministry, and it is just as valid ministry as when you're counseling someone in your church office or preaching from behind a pulpit. And if we can see it that way, it is not the penalty box. It is not failure. It is not wrong. You're not, abdicating your calling to be out in the marketplace. I think it's a really good thing for pastors to be in the marketplace, and it pays a lot better than just simply being holed up in a church, isolated, disconnected from the very world we've been called to reach. So get excited about it. Quit acting like it's the penalty box.
Well, the reality is this: the secular sacred concept is not a biblical concept at all.
Correct.
I mean, you can't find it. It just doesn't exist.
Right.
But the reality is that God wants to use you to reach people, and you can't reach people if you're never around people.
Right.
How are you going to share the gospel with the lost if you're never around the lost? And we still have this thing, and it just blows my mind that it exists, that 70 plus, almost 80% of pastors don't have one close personal friend. I don't get that. I'll give you an example just with you and me. Our friendship came about. We connected. Actually, you had me on your podcast, and we were kind of fired up like we are right now on your podcast years ago. That's how we connected. But I mentioned to you that I always wanted to pheasant hunt, and you said, well, come on up.
Let's go.
Well, this year, I'll be there for my 5th year in a row.
Praise God.
But I had to put effort. It cost money. I had to do what I do because it's something I always wanted to do. I could sit and spend the rest of my life going, man, I wish I could have pheasant hunted, or I could be celebrating that this is my 5th year that I'm going. And I'm taking bringing 2 new guys this year. I'll bring someone with me every time I come because I took advantage of what was available there. It's not going to come lay itself down on you. You got to get up and be active, proactive.
Yeah.
See these things change. And do you run into that with pastors who are kind of like, well, it's not really coming my way? What do you see there?
Yeah, I'll tell you this. And Pastor, before I say this, you got to know this. I love you. I love pastors. I'm having this conversation because I love pastors. I've thought many times it'd be easier just to walk away from all of this and let them figure it out. But Pastor, I love the church and I love pastors. So I've earned the right to say what I'm getting ready to say. So Pastors are some of the most entitled people that I know. Because they have some of the greatest poverty mindsets, because poverty produces an entitlement spirit where you sit back and expect things to be given to you for free. Pastors are some of the worst at it. Well, I'm a pastor. That should be given to me for free. I should have a discount. I get that you're broke, but nobody owes you anything. Instead, let's get out into the world, create something of value, and now be able to give out of the overflow of the abundance that you have, instead of constantly being in this position of, I need other people to give to me. And so here's where I'm going with this, Dale. I see that being one of the biggest roadblocks for pastors moving forward. Yeah. They are some of the most cynical. I get in these pastor groups and try to share the message of Entrepastors in Facebook, and I get blown up. I get called everything but a Christian by some of these pastors. And it's like, because they're so cynical. They're like, oh, so someone's trying to sell something. Someone's got some next level marketing thing. And I'm like, bro, I'm trying to help you. And is there a price tag for help? Yes, there is. And you'll be in a much better place. And you know who doesn't have that mentality, Dale, is people who are owning businesses out in the marketplace. They understand that when they show up and provide a service, it is an exchange of value. It is a win-win proposition. It is people on the giving end, the receiving end of poverty, who often see things as a win-lose unless they're just being given to in a charitable way. So that's not for everybody. I'm not saying all pastors are that, but if the shoe fits, pastor, wear it, repent, and let's get you some help. But you're going to have to get the help. You're going to have to invest in that. And the very fact that, that investment is a hardship for you should stand as reason why you need to make such investment. Yes. So that the day is coming where that doesn't rock your world anymore, to invest into a little bit of coaching or something that can help you get to a better place. So, all right, I'm going to get off that soapbox, but thanks for letting me vent. And
I'm so glad you did, because it brought up, and I got to watch how I say this, because I want to make sure that I don't come across wrong with how I'm saying this. But I have met so many pastors who their retirement plan was to trust God. And I believe in trusting God. I have no doubt about it. And the Lord has supernaturally done things for Gina and I that are mind-boggling.
Yeah.
But I have met many of them as they have reached retirement age who are very bitter at God, who are very angry at the church, because they didn't prepare, they didn't plan, they didn't put forth any effort, they didn't put back any money. And again, when you're broke, you can't put back money. So look, I understand when the bills are $2,000 a month and you make $1,500. I've lived that life.
Yep, me too.
Dave Ramsey doesn't work there.
Yep.
You can use the Dave Ramsey stuff, but when you make less than you owe, it is difficult. And so I'm not picking on you. I'm not doubling down on you, but I just want you to understand this. The Lord has given you great skills. Yes. The Lord has given you, He has gifted you. He has given you the ability to earn money. The Bible says you are worthy of your hire. Yeah. And so this mentality that just, and what I'm trying to distinguish is put your head in the sand and just hope. I had Jason Allison on the last podcast, and he said one of the things he always remembers that I said to him from early on was, hope's not a strategy.
Right.
I hope it works. Well, that's not going to get you there. And so you got to be proactive. You can't depend on the church. You can't depend on the government. You can't depend on your family. Yes, you can depend on God, but don't get yourself in a position to where you get bitter at God because you made bad choices, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, 100% agree. Sometimes God's provision shows up in the form of work boots or an opportunity, or you recognizing, hey, I can leverage these skills that God has given me in a way that, I can be compensated for that. So that's the thing, Dale. This is, I have nothing against a bivocational pastor who just has another job, but I'm absolutely a fan of entrepreneurialism, because it can be far more flexible. It can be far more beneficial. To be fully transparent, one day in the early days of one of my businesses, I'm driving home after just a 14-hour workday where nothing went well, and kind of adding up the numbers in my head. And I thought, I think I just worked for less than minimum wage today with, with how this all turned out. So welcome to the life of an entrepreneur. So it's not all, gumdrops and lollipops, as they say, but it's a great opportunity for you, pastor, to leverage your skills. And I wanted to say something too to the pastor who goes, okay, that sounds great, Jon. If I was 20 or 30 years younger, I could go start that business. Let me just expand your thinking a little bit. If you step into the service-based space right now, Pastor, literally as we speak, thousands of people across the country are going to Google, typing in who can paint my house, who can fix my fence, who can build this or wash that or clean this. They're looking for those services, and you may be beyond your physical ability to like really want to go do that type of work. Okay, so how does being a pastor, how can you step into that space and really build a powerful business? Like this past week, Dale, I've made several $1,000s through my business, and I've not gone and done any of the work at all. I've got a team of people that are out doing the work. They're getting paid well for it, and then I get paid as a result of the work that they're doing. Where does that come from? Well, for years as a pastor, I learned how to build people. I learned how to build teams. I learned how to rally people around a common vision and a mission. And that can be applied to a painting business, a cleaning business, and you can minister to the people that are helping earn money for you. Like, so pastor, you don't necessarily have to be the guy at the end of the, paintbrush all the time, but you can build a business in that type of space or countless other options. And that's what we do at Entrepastors. We kind of help you figure out, like, how has God gifted you? What are your skill sets? And where is there a need in the marketplace that you can help solve for people? And wherever that intersection is, let's plug you in there and get you started in a business of your own. And it's so cool to watch pastors thrive as they kind of turn a new season in their life as an entrepreneur, as well as being a pastor. It's fun stuff. I love the work we get to do.
If you want to get spiritual about this, which hopefully everything we talked about is spiritual, but if you want, you get healthy, your church gets healthy, and there's people who come into the kingdom because you got healthy.
Yeah.
So there is that side of this. It's not just about making more money, but you should be able to live, and take care of your family. But you get healthy, your church gets healthy, your focus becomes more outward than inward. One of the things that's happening to churches all across America, it has for years, is they get to a place where they're kind of having sustained health. That's when they get inward focused and they begin to decline. We want to see that shift. And so, Pastor, if you get healthy, there's a good chance people will come into the kingdom. And I don't think that's a stretch at all to say that. As we get to the end of this, Jon, so someone's listening and we've kind of scratched an itch for them and they're like, man, I want to take the next step. What does someone need to do?
Yeah, if you just want to reach out to me at Entrepastors.com, that's our website. And entre is just the word entrepreneur with the word pastor, put in there. So Entrepastors.com. And my email is Jon at Entrepastors.com. You reach out with any questions or whatever. We'd love to come alongside you and support you and help you in this season. So feel free to reach out.
Well, I love to keep updating what you're doing. We've talked about this multiple times since you launched, and we've had you and Les on. I would have loved to have Les join us today, but he's too busy out on vacation right now, celebrating the fact that he's not broke. And so, hopefully he gets to hear that.
He's in South Dakota right now, by the way, so he's out enjoying God's country as well. So.
Well, so we'll get him back on it sometime if he can slow down enough to have us. But I just want pastors to know there are alternatives, there are opportunities. We are in a changing landscape. Things are shifting, and it's actually happening faster than it's ever happened. I think. I mean, it's hard to keep up with what's going on. But Jesus has a plan, and none of the things that's going on in America with the politics and all this stuff, nothing that's happening has caught him by surprise. And he wants you to be healthy. He wants you to take care of your soul, and he wants you to thrive as a leader. And so, if this has touched a nerve with you, please reach out to Jon. If you need to reach out to me, I can communicate and get you on to Jon. But just know that there's hope. So as we wrap up today, just you're sitting talking to a pastor. You guys are having a cup of coffee, and he's like, "Man, I just don't know what I need to do." What would you say to him, Jon?
Man, there is freedom. Like, there's freedom to pivot. There's freedom to change. Your future can look different than your present. And I know it may sound cliche and oversimplified, but it's true. And if you're ready to think differently and behave differently, we can help you achieve different results than what you're currently getting. So just enjoy the journey. Let's take an adventure together, and we'll walk beside you. You don't have to do it alone. I love what you said earlier, Dale, about so many pastors don't have that friend. We will be that friend for you. Like, we will walk beside you in this journey and build a relationship with you. Don't do it alone. You don't have to do it in isolation. So yeah, reach out and let us serve you. We'd love to help you.
Well, I'm going to practice what you preach. I'll see you in a few weeks. So
Awesome. Praise God, man. Let's go.
My 5th pheasant hunting trip and bringing my friends Jason and Will with me, and cannot wait to get back there. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for always having a really lively, fun podcast when we get together, and I look forward to when we do it again.
All right. Love you, bro. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.